very special session with two amazing women, Savia Viegas and Leila Badyari, in conversation. Before I get into the session, I wanted to quickly take a moment and reflect on MOG Sundays itself as well. MOG Sundays has remained a space that has continued to host conversations across intersections of art, architecture, to even air traffic control, and we remain committed to bringing these conversations to you that are of crucial importance to our growing societies. And we are starting a community fundraising initiative to ensure that this space remains open and accessible to all. So if you've been a part of MOOC Sundays before and you've carried back a thought or a feeling that has made you think and act, we would really appreciate your support in helping us keep this space accessible. And you can donate on your way out on the QR codes that are on display. And now to Dr. Savia Viegas, a storyteller who moves between books, embroidery, and memory. Growing up in the village of Carmona, Savia learned early how small everyday moments carry big stories. The conversation today will focus on her latest exhibition, Love Tales, which is also on display at the Gallery 2 of Museum of Goa. Here, hand-stitched embroidery on upcycled denim brings stories of love, desire, and daily life from Goa's oral archives into the public domain. As a fellow storyteller, Leila Badyari will guide the conversation to explore how Savia blends text, image, and craft to give shape to emotions and memories, and how these forms of community histories often quietly preserved to surface in compelling ways. Before we begin, we will watch a short film created by filmmakers Anjali Montero and KP Jayashankar, which takes us behind the scenes of the making of Savia's art.
And I've been really looking forward to this conversation over the last couple of weeks. I want to start with something very simple. So you grew up in the village of Carmona, and it is one of those places that I think has remained largely unchanged in Goa. Can you take us through your earliest memories of the village, the life there, and how that impacted your work and your creative life?
First, before I answer, I'd like to say that coming to MOG is like coming home. So every time I do the 100-kilometer trek along with Anu Babani, it's like finding peace here. So to Sharda, to the organizers and her team, thank you very much for this. It's not easy to have every Sunday doing this selfless work. Okay, thank you for your question. Yes, I'm totally a Goan. Like, my family would have not ventured out of South Goa. Very few relatives in North Goa. So growing up was a time when things were transitioning. Half of the family spoke Portuguese. But my particular family, my immediate nuclear family, we were like veering towards Konkani. And I'm so happy in one way for that transition because it allowed me to catch the vibe of Goa, the working class, the plebeian vibe of Goa, which I find is deeply rooted in me. So while I understand Portuguese, I understand this better. Carmona, where I lived in the south, was like a very urban village. You had a large population of doctors. When I was growing up, this is like late 1950s, 57, 58, 59. There were six doctors practicing locally. There were equal number of lawyers who lived in the village, practiced in the city. And there were a large number of teachers. So it was a very urbane place where people visited each other. Conversations were very, informed. Certainly, I found an erosion into that after 1961. It kept fluctuating in the 70s, particularly when the hippies came, because the vibe changed totally. Then in the 70s, also you had people from from Africa coming. So they brought in a new kind of energy, new kind of music, new kind of stories from an African homeland. So that was very exciting because otherwise growing up in a Goan village, it was rooted in its insularity. So you knew what was happening in December, you knew what happened in January, you knew when Lent was, and your life was dictated by family events, by the seasons of sowing and plowing and reaping and eating, and religiosity, extreme religiosity. So these comings, the hippies, the coming of the Afrikaners, they created a new vibe. I remember, particularly in school, I loved to make friends with new people coming because they brought in new stories. My hunger for stories started at a very young age, and I think we'll talk about that later on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Savia. Yeah, that's actually my next question. So, one of the things we also touched upon in our call when we spoke earlier is the relationship between art and crisis or uncertain times. I think given the world that we live in currently, conflict is starting to feel like the new norm. And there's so much unpredictability in the world today, which a lot of people are finding very reminiscent of COVID times. Also, I think the decisions that are driven by panic or fear. So what is your view on how people turn to art during these times? Because I think one thing we can all agree on is that during COVID, a lot of people went back to the basics. They went back to art. They went back to their homes, to family recipes, to baking, to crocheting, I think in your case as well. So I would love to hear from you the journey of how you feel these crisis situations interplay with art and how they affect each other.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, Leila? One door closes, another opens. To a large extent, as far as I can remember, even as a child, I had this hunger for stories because I was an only child for about good 5 years, and I was born after several years of marriage of my parents. So, and I was a child prone to febrile convulsions. So every time I had a bodyguard, because you never know in a big house when a kid just the fever spikes and the kid is kind of in rigor mortis. So I was never allowed to go anywhere alone in the fields or anywhere. So it was a very suffocating kind of childhood. And so being this kind of child under kind of constant watch, I would always go and be around adults. So that allowed me to eavesdrop into their stories, one. Second was that from an eavesdropper, I became a fabulist. And from a fabulist, then I learned to become a flaneur, mapping the countryside of Goa. I like to write about rural stories. But then there was a brief or a long hiatus, I should say, because I lived in the city, got married, worked in the city, and a city citizen has to work. So when I came back to Goa, I came back with a good fellowship, but also with the thing of having created some trouble in the college where I worked. I had a loud voice and I never took things sitting down. So that was a big turmoil in my life, and that is when I turned to art and writing. So this was roughly around 2004, 2005, where I didn't want to allow things that had kind of thrown me off balance from my college job to kind of get the better of me. And that's the time I started restoring the old house and started writing stories and painting. But that went on till COVID struck. And at the time of COVID, I was redoing the cupboards of my late mother's belongings. She was a seamstress. And we had a pact to do a quilt together of old denim jeans which I had brought from the city and belonged to my children who had outgrown them. So, and I got busy with my life and I realized that my mother had stitched together the flanks of all the jeans and embroidered on them, and she had passed away. So that was something that worked on my mind, and I decided that I had to honor her memory. So I opened it up, cut each piece, joined them together with crochet. These were skills I'd learned as a child, and then the quilt began to speak to me, as if in my mother's voice. There were stories from my childhood, little symbols that, opened up a thread of a vision of the past childhood. So that became the first exhibition, which was also exhibited at MOG in 2024. And it opened up a window of opportunity of using, craft art. Craft is essentially reified art because it's seen as women's work. And I enjoyed it because a lot of my work has women's voices, strong women's voices, and using a women's medium to articulate that speech is good. So it's true, especially when there are, social upheavals or things that upset society, you turn to art because that becomes an inward journey, where you can find stability, a kind of normalcy in a world that is fluctuating around you, where everything seems to be swimming away and what once was precious becomes flotsam.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's so insightful and absolutely agree with you. I think we see that even in today's world. Leading up to that, I found this story so inspiring. I think every community, village, or even every family has that one woman, that is considered almost mad in a sense, and the story of Virginia feels like that to me. And I just want, and it would be lovely if you could tell us, where did the courage really come from to tell those stories? Because most of us are taught, like you said, from our childhoods to hide these stories. Don't tell the story of that woman. And I can say with a lot of certainty, I'm sure every family, village, community has those stories. So where did the courage come from, and what inspired you to document and tell these stories?
Thanks for that question. I also wondered where the courage came from. Because you are supposed to hide these stories, whispered little details, So and so went to church wearing a sari. Oh, what a sacrilegious act. Because you're always condemning her behavior. It's never like appraised. But she, in her own right, was doing something which she thought was right for herself as a woman. And which was a thought that stayed in me. I collected a lot of these nuggets because when growing up, I grew up with very strong women. A great-grandmother had grappled a tiger. I had a grandmother who, was a property developer. Like when the property was being snatched, she went to court and fought for it. This was like 1930s, 20s. She fought for her property and got it back from her parents. Then there was another grand aunt who had dug all the ponds and the wells in our immediate family neighborhood. So when there were these women, at the age of, so it was a shadow you walked under, but you couldn't avoid that gravity that those shadows created. So when I went to Bombay, and I was studying in Elphinstone College, and as a Catholic, your surname is a giveaway. So when you're Goan and Catholic, people started asking, you know what Goans are called in Bombay? Makapaus. You know what Goans are called in Bombay? Oh, then I saw a film later on. This was this film, Albert Pinto ko gussa kyun aata hai? So, there was these little pointers which were thrusting me in a different direction. An image that was media created, an image that was Bollywood created, which I didn't fit into as a Goan at all. I was carrying a different narrative. In fact, Roland Barthes says, narrative is a line which tells your history and which, kind of puts together mythologies, fables, and everything around which your life is woven. So I was just wondering why this is going in the wrong direction. And I realized that, there was also a segment of our society that migrated to Bombay, and given the views of the city, it had thrust segments of population into different directions and then kind of given them these very different kind of identities. So that was a time that I felt that I had to tell my stories. Stories of women I had grown up with. stories which I heard as a childhood, because they were so arresting in their uniqueness and their strength, and nobody knew these stories, and what was being given to me was an identity which was totally strange and alien to my rootedness as a Goan. So that was when the journey began, but the real opportunity came when I moved to Goa. Because even in Bombay, I did Indology. When I studied Indology, it included Sanskrit. And the study of Sanskrit thrusts you in a different area. You get othered. You get othered because you are a Catholic studying a very precinct language. So there were several attempts I made to kind of fit in. I wore a sari, I dressed in the way Indians would, I gave up my frocks forever. And also these stories which I carried in my heart and my mind of my growing up years, I kind of dumped them in an amorphous river through which I did not retrieve them. But my modern identity, identity as a city person was something else. So when I came back to Goa, I found, oh my God, this is my background. This is my history. And to tell my history, I had to retrieve those stories from that amorphous river into which I have dumped them. If I don't do that, nobody else will. Because nobody else knows about the urbanity of Goa. Goa is not like any other village, any other state in India. Why are all people who have had a convent education or an English education feeling a new kind of nostalgia for the Goan village or a Goan residence? That's because things are different here. And it was this voice that I had to maintain, despite that fact that this landscape was shifting from under my feet, and it was creating new pressures for the local population to find a home in Swindon, to find a home in Southall or wherever, while a new kind of population was being built. At one level, I knew this had to happen because we were Indians, but at the same time, somebody had to register those goings. And as a flaneur, I thought it was my duty to record that without being spiteful. It is just a process of life. It is just a rite of passage, this writing.
So I can see a lot of surprised faces also in the audience, because I think that the story that you just told of Goa, I think a lot of people are hearing it for the first time. There is a very set image of what Goa is and what it isn't. Which leads me to one of my last questions, and I'd love for the audience also to share any questions or thoughts they have. Given this debate about Goa and its evolution and the ever-ending conversation, which is now almost dinner table conversation in most Goan homes, of what constitutes a Goan identity, what is Goa? There's such a huge debate with the development, the infrastructure versus preservation. And that the identity of Goa often gets lost. It's dichotomized. It's either the touristy image or it's the very Sussegat village life. What you just described, the empowered women, these courageous people, I think this is a side of Goa most people never get to hear about or see. So if you can encapsulate for us, for somebody who was visiting Goa today or moving here, what would you say to them about Goa that they perhaps don't know? The Goa that we grew up in decades ago. What is that message for them? What is it that they might be missing in the loudness of the conversations that are being had around Goa?
As an Indian and as a Goan, I strongly believe that, in the words of John Berger, who once wrote Seventh Man, that you move where money takes you or where your work takes you. So we have a right to move wherever, because Goans, as a small population, have moved to different parts of the world. And so also people from different parts of the world have a right to settle here. But having said that, I think one of the things that one gets angered about is the fact that they create little pockets of people who come from outside. And behind these gated communities, you find that another life is being lived. Whereas local populations who live here continue with their rituals of mass, death and births, and they do not mingle. So these kind of divides are becoming wider and wider. Then there is the second migrant population who comes here to work, because a lot of your able-bodied men and women have gone to West Asia, or they have gone to Britain, because jobs are available there. And Goans have this facility of knowing language, knowing the cuisine, and being, free with that and Western habits. They get absorbed not only in Swindon, but even in other places, and absorbed very quickly because they have the facility of their religion. And they go and people churches where numbers are dropping. So having said that, I think it's very important for the local population and the people who are coming here to kind of break that wall that is being built between the two people who reside here. That is one thing. The second thing is, you also find that a lot of Goan land was locked. It was family property, it was family bequeathals, nobody sold it. But, once I remember somebody telling me that, this house consumes all my energy. It's like an ancestor who I have to keep feeding, I don't get anything from it. A lot of those old properties are being encashed now. And the scramble to get those properties, a lot of unhealthy practices are coming in, which is the bane of our society. If you look at the old land owners, there was a system of ethics which is being eroded into. And lots of unseemly deals are coming around, about which I have misgivings. But I can only hope that those who come here and claim Goa as their home also learn to love it, live in it, and integrate as much as you can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Answer that beautifully. Shall we open the questions to the audience if anybody would like to ask Savia anything?
I just want to ask you about your last sentence. Do you mean integration or do you mean inclusion? Because I work with a very marginalized community as well of people with disabilities. And we're talking about integration, but whenever we talk about integration, it is about them having to fit in. Whereas inclusion works when both sides want this to happen. So in the context of Goa, do you think that local people are also as open to including others or is it really an effort on the part of people who come in? Surely it has to work both ways. What do you feel about this?
See, whether you call it inclusion or integration, the emotion wanting people to come together is the same. And it is, I don't care who makes the effort first. In some cases the locals, in some cases those who have come after them. But you have to make it consciously. Get involved in school processes. Give your specialism to schools. Every time I pass by from Margao to Panjim, I'm just counting the number of restaurants. There's never a club. There's never a garden coming up where kids can come and play. All one hears of is terrible things happening to women and children and youngsters dying on the road with their brains spilled out. And so we have to put some kind of order in our society. And for that, it cannot happen with one population pulling back and the other, pulling in a different direction. You have to take the government to task. You have to join hands, find meeting points where a common ground for creating a civil society is found.
Thank you.
Savia, I'm Veena.
I've lived in Goa for 19 years now, but I've been coming here from 76. And I've been brought up as a Goan in Bangalore. Lived with a Goan family, all the festivities, everything. But having moved to Goa, I mean, we know each other, I know artists, everyone else, but I live in a very Goan village. They do not want me to be part of the village. So I have allowed them to do what they like so that it makes them comfortable, and I'm comfortable. But I don't understand it. Because I know Goans of all strata of society. But the Goans in the villages, and this is, you know, Pilen, it's a very, I would say, modern village. But they do not want other Indians, outsiders, to come in. And I do understand why, because you have stated whatever you stated is true. Everything you've said is it. But I'm not in a gated community. You know, I am in a Goan house, and my doors are open, and I have Goan neighbors. One, unfortunately, passed away. So I don't understand this. Where do they come? Why is there hostility? What are they worried that I will do to them? And after 19 years, where I don't interfere in anything, I go to church when there's a funeral. I even go for prayers to other people's homes because I've always been to church. Do you have any thoughts on this?
To tell you very frankly, I speak Konkani, I understand the culture well. I have lived for 20 years of my life in the village, and I have returned after 40 and lived for another 20 years. I'm still an outsider in my village. So anyone who breaks the doxa of the habitus, who just is an outlier in lifestyle and difference, becomes an outlier. How to break this, I don't know. It's probably the stranglehold of the church. But one has to keep trying. Creating institutions where, you know, kids, a second generation grows up. I mean, I always remember the work of Pierre Bourdieu, who talks about how children get integrated in the West into visiting museums. When they are small kids, the practice of the museum is to reach out to children, bring potsherds, introduce them to archaeology, introduce them to history. And that is when that generation grows up. They grow up with sensibilities of a practice of a museum culture, where museum visiting, where appreciation of art, appreciation of archaeology and one's own history becomes a lifestyle practice. So I think we have to let this older generation have their own whimsies, work with young people, whether it's at school level or any other level. That's when you probably find new voices, you probably find a new Goa emerging.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I'll give you some context. So, like Savia said, I was born, brought up in Goa. I have lived my entire life here. I've worked in other cities and studied there, of course. But my parents originally weren't Goan. They moved here in the 70s, built a life here. And identity for me has always been a very sensitive subject because I've always asked myself, what is my identity? At the heart of it, I call Goa home. I am a Goan. And over the years, I realized, like Savia said, there are people who might have viewed me as an outsider. I was too naive to realize that maybe as a child and even as I was growing up. Now, I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm married to someone who's from Bombay, originally from Bangalore. The cultural integrations, they keep mixing. Okay, now my daughter is a quarter Kashmiri, quarter Mangalorean, quarter German. She's grown up in Goa. She was born here. I can tell you this, and I think this is a good way to end this. She believes Goa as a country. She's decided that there are so many cultures here, there are so many foods, there are so many people. Whenever we go anywhere, even if we go just to Bombay or anywhere close by, she's like, is this India? Because I want to go back to Goa now. she's decided this place is so huge and it carries so many different voices and people that it is a country in itself. And I think, like Savia said, that future generation, right, they are the ones who will be able to do the inclusion and the integration because they're seeing all of us mingle. And correctly, like you said, this is why we also bring her to spaces like this where she gets to learn about the culture that she's growing up in, what is her home, and all of the other cultures that she is bound to also engage with over the years. So yeah, I think the next generation is the one to target. The older ones, perhaps they are a little too rigid to change, but we can change the future for sure.
I have a question actually. So I think it was 2 weeks ago when another artist, Nitya Nondikrishnan, was here, and he was talking about how he painted this very intimate scene between a man and a woman, and he felt ashamed of his own gaze. And that's again a man's gaze, and there's a lot of complication that comes with it. And you know, all of your stories, whether it's Songs Come True or like literally any of your work, deals with such intimate moments in a very up close sort of a sense. And you lend your empathy to them, you lend your sort of like, I don't know what it is exactly, but how do you sort of deal with it? What stories do you choose to tell? Because at times they are graphic, at times they are really intense. And are there like situations where you've chosen not to say things or to say things because of a certain reason, and where does that decision making come from?
Actually, if you look at my past, I've been a very straight Catholic, raised Catholic with a lot of taboos. Don't do this, don't do that. This is worship. Worship means scandalous and not a nice thing to do. But my city life and my own growth as a person made me realize that some things are important in life. Some things like emotions, some things like life, love. There's nothing dirty about them. Whether it's a same-sex love, or whether it's a transgender love, or whether it's a love of a man and a woman, or a chemistry that flows between two people and grows. But this is not an idea that's widely accepted, but I choose to speak about it nonetheless, because I'm passing through like everybody is, and this is what I believe in, and may as well leave some footprints on the ground. But I remember, now that you told me, the book, Song Sung Blue, the cover has a very intimate image of a man, his backside, and the girl in a petticoat. And that's a defining moment in the book, because, you know, the boy tells her when she comes out in that petticoat, they're gone to somebody's house and they're using that house. He says, oh, don't pretend to be Queen Victoria, because she's the one who introduces petticoats. And that's the scene. The girl is frontal, but it's a petticoat, and you see the man, the backside, fully nude. So when I took the book to a local bookstore, I publish my own books and I sell them. That lady, she's a friend of mine, she said, yeah, I'll take 50 books, don't worry. You know, you take your money and you'll recover some of it. So she took those 50 books and she saw the cover. She said, how is Quinta care करती हैं? She said, oh my God, what have you done? So then I said, please display it on your main counter so that you have sales. So she took the book and she covered the man. And she showed just the woman in the petticoat. She says, don't show everything. I mean, this is a process of life, you know. It's a rite of passage. Yet we create these boundaries and get caught in them so badly that we can't extricate ourselves.
I think so Savia will take us on a short tour of her lovely work so that we can get a first-hand view of it. Thank you all so much for being so engaging and patient, and thank you, Savia. It's been absolutely lovely getting to know you.
Yeah. I would also like to thank Anjali and Jai Shankar for holding our hands and being with us all through the exhibition. The kind of patience and love and endurance they have shown, it takes my breath away. Thank you.